Judith Light stars in not one, but two series this season, Julia on Max and Shining Vale on Stars. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Judith, I wanted to start with Julia first because you get to play this extraordinary real-life figure, Blanche Knopf. When you
Mhm.
first started with Julia in season one, how did you go about learning about her, and what do you most admire about Blanche Knopf?
Oh, that's such a. First of all, I have to acknowledge you for pronouncing it properly. I had to go into ADR, which is looping for people who don't know, and I kept saying Knopf, Knopf, and everybody said to me, "It's Knopf." Anyway, Blanche Knopf, very, very, very famous, but unknown, unacknowledged character. And I went about uh, working on her because Chris Kaiser and Daniel Goldfarb, who wrote the script, wrote that character in with such perfection and in such detail that it was almost I just walked into her and was able to put on her skin. So I would say that, and also The Lady with the Borzoi, the book that Laura Claridge wrote, really, really helped me a lot with the history of Blanche and what she went through, and that she was, married to Alfred Knopf, and he was the one who took all the credit for everything. And it was she was butt up against the patriarchy and him really taking all the credit for all the work that she had done, and she was remarkable. I mean, she didn't, and it was funny because she worked with and I got to work with Fiona Glasgow, who's this extraordinary actress and lovely, amazing person, and she played Judith Jones, who was uh, um a Julia Child's cookbook editor. And Blanche wanted nothing to do with these cookbooks, but it was actually the money from the cookbooks that kept Knopf really, really going. I mean, she was, this is Freud and Albert Camus, and those were the people that she wanted, Willa Cather, that's who she wanted. And it was like, but it was Judith's intelligence that really made it possible for those cookbooks to be edited by Knopf Publishing. Great, great character, amazing character. And the irony of her, that's so amazing, is that for a person who was about reading and her life's work was about reading, right? She was going blind and she had to learn to rely on other people. Extraordinary, extraordinary character. It was the people around Julia Child that was who Daniel and Chris and the other writers were focusing on.
Yeah, I wanted to dive into that incredibly challenging situation we find Blanche in at the beginning of season two, and just the way the relationship between her and Judith develops because Blanche is so harsh with her. And it's an expression of her own, frustration and irritation at her disease, and what's going on, her condition. But, I just wanted to ask you about exploring that dynamic where you need to be so, cruel to the person who's willing to help you the most. It must have been interesting to play.
It was very interesting. What a great, very great clarity on your part. Great observation. Yes, very complicated. And again, I go back to the writing. They created that, and they really also were watching what Fiona and I were doing together, and they started creating the dynamics of that, the way we were relating. And out of that, there's always something underneath, and you put your finger on it. You said out of her own frustration. She was very independent and wanted to be independent and didn't want to rely on anybody. And that's part of the character. But underneath, there is this terror and this vulnerability and real um, worry and tenderness, and knowing that she could do that with this person who would still always be there for her. And it is a great, great observation. Yeah. And very, and not difficult to play because who of Fiona and how good she is and how well it was created and written.
We see that kind of push and pull all season between the two of them, and they always kind of stay together despite the challenges. And you have one of the most, I think, extraordinary scenes in the whole second season, which is when Judith gives that speech at the Knopf 50th anniversary party. I think your performance is so terrific because you don't, I think you don't say a single word in that scene. But between watching Blanche react to Alfred's speech where he doesn't acknowledge her at all, and then watching Judith give a speech directly toasting her, and then the entire audience, I just wanted to ask you about playing that scene, you know, sitting at that table, kind of soaking in the toast for Blanche, and then communicating so much. I mean, you do so little, but it's such a beautiful scene. So how did you communicate all that without, you know, having a single word of dialogue to say?
God, you are so good. It When you are steeped in a character, when a character is so beautifully written and created, and when you have great actors around you, for me, it infuses me with what I am to do or what I am not to do. And in that, it was the taking in, as you said, of the room and the acknowledgement after the discount. And everyone knows what that feels like. We are living in a time in our country where people feel incredibly discounted, that they don't feel that they make a difference. And we all have that to one degree or another in our lives. But when you are creating a character, when you have great people and a great team working to support you, you're able to set aside everything else and just let those things come through you. And if you're not one of those people who says, how come I don't say anything? I think I should say something. Shouldn't I be saying something? It's like, that's the ego. It's like, no, you should just shut up and just be there. And we as human beings know very little about being, not doing. Because as an actor, if all you're ever doing is doing, you don't get a chance to have the being come through of the character. And this was one of those opportunities.
Yeah, as I said, it's one of my favorite scenes of the whole season. And you get one scene.
Mine too.
Yeah. You get one scene kind of with Julia Child this season. It's on the telephone. The last scene you have in the series, actually.
Yeah.
I know you weren't with Sarah Lancashire in the room for that scene, but I know you did share a great scene with her in season 1. I just wanted to ask, working with her as Julia, I mean, I think that's such a transformative performance. I mean, everybody cast, but that her in particular, right? Just extraordinary.
She's incredible. I mean, talk about getting everybody else out of your mind, including Julia Child, to see her do this. And again, she's a genius creator. She has these kinds of scripts and storylines. She gets to work with the extraordinary David Hyde Pierce and other people. We had that great scene in the restaurant, and really, I'm very appreciative of the homework that you have done. It's really quite lovely. Thank you. That they're to work with her and have her be larger than life and have her be so present and generous and available to the actual scene that we were doing when we were together, so that I knew what it was going to be when we had the phone call. So it fed into that moment. And also it was the moment about, what was the relation. It was Judith Jones putting her on the phone with me. So that's the other component of the relationship.
Where would you have hoped a third season of Julia would have gone? Did you talk to, the writers, Chris and Dan? Did you know what might have gone for Blanche, or what did you hope to see for Blanche in season 3?
We didn't know. I'm sure they had ideas, and you'd have to talk to them about where they were going with the whole expansion of the show. But what I would hope for, what I would have trusted them where they would go, is to go further into Blanche's blindness, her reliance on Judith. There's this incredible story in Laura Claridge's book where she talks about how Blanche was so vain and didn't want anybody to know that she was going blind. She would cross the street. She couldn't see the lights, but she would just like walk across the street. And like, this is New York City, and traffic would have to stop. But it was like, how do you, which also brings to mind the humor that, I think that they also would have used very much so. And also the kindness of how Judith cared for Blanche and how she took care of her. And how, even though Blanche would push her away, she would always come back. It was always her kindness. You were talking about kindness in the very beginning. It was always her generosity toward this woman who she felt great love for and great appreciation for, and held as an inspiration. I mean, Blanche Knopf was the premier publisher and editor of that time. And nobody knew it. Nobody knew it. So it would have given more exposure to this particular time and women in this time and that particular character.
Before we turn to Shining Vale, Judith, I have to ask you, Blanche was so obviously passionate about books. I just wanted to know, do you have a favorite novel? Do you have a favorite author? Who comes to mind when you think about your favorite literature?
My husband. He just had his first novel published in 2020, and we were about to have a bit of a book tour. So much for that, right? And he wrote another novel that he's in the process of getting published now. So I'd have to say he's pretty much right up there. But I am of the mind and the reading and of Blanche Knopf. Those are my people. Those are the writers that are enduring for me. And also I'd have to say, all of those creators and writers and ones that she supported. But also I have to say poetry and playwrights, and like, I'd have to say that there's very little, and I like historical novels, and nonfiction, and I mean, I'm a reader, and I'm dedicated to that. So I come to Blanche by my love of reading.
Yeah, that passion comes through in the performance as well. Okay, let's talk about Shining Vale, because this is such a unique series in the tone.
Yeah.
Your character Joan is so fun. I mean, how did you come up with, how much of that physicality and accent was on the page? How much did you bring to it? Because it's such a unique kind of confection even in your career of so many different roles. It's such.
Did you call it a confection? Yeah. Love that. Totally. She's a total confection. Absolutely. She's like a petit four that somebody put the fondant icing on, and like they just slapped it on and threw it around and said, "Oh, I'm going to eat this," and then took a bite out of it. This character is Jeff Astroff. This character is, that's all. And Courtney Cox. Courtney Cox. You seen Courtney Cox like this before? I hadn't. She is stunning. And Greg Kinnear and Gus Burney, who is my good friend Reed Burney's daughter. I mean, we're talking about a really remarkable cast. And you're talking about women and mental illness. That's the layer that's underneath the confection, which is where, the top layer is the, you know, the pink icing, and it's the fun and it's the humor, but it's the underneath that is so which is the horror about the way we treat women, and when they have to deal with mental illness, and all people when they're dealing with mental illness, the vulnerability, the fear, the medication, the asylum, the that's why this show was so unusual, and I'm so sorry it didn't get picked up, because it's a horror comedy drama. I don't know how you do that. That's a triple somersault if I ever saw one, or a triple Lutz. You know, if you're a skating enthusiast, like a figure skating enthusiast, like I am. But if you look at that, you can see the degree to which there's a moment that is horrific, followed by a moment of great caring, great love, great, and then phenomenal comedy. It's like, what mother gets a shark tank and has baby sharks? It's like, yeah, get baby sharks. Yeah, let's do that. But all of that is just like, it's all Jeff Astrof and all his writers. Amazing, incredible.
That's what I wanted to touch on, because as you're saying, I feel like Joan says a lot of profound things, but she says them in particularly hilarious ways. We get a lot of, comparisons of mental illnesses like glitter, men are like sharks. I mean, these really fun, really delicious lines. Just how fun was it to kind of say those words and work opposite Courtney? Like, was it just a blast to do this show?
A blast, a complete blast. I mean, that scene that you see where I take her to have her abortion, where I go with her to have the abortion. I mean, it's like, and when you play that kind of comedy, and Courtney knows this really well, when you play that kind of comedy, you must take it incredibly seriously. And when you do, it's hilarious. And yes, it was a complete blast to do. Absolutely.
Before I let you go, Judith, I have to just ask you about this past January. It seems like a while ago, but you've won a Primetime Emmy for Poker Face. It was such a joy to see you finally win that Emmy after many nominations. Take us back to that moment. I mean, now that it's been a couple months, what does that feel like at this moment in your career and your life?
I still don't believe it. I mean, I still don't, and I don't mean that in some coy way. It's like, I did not expect that. I mean, the women who were in that category, and when I think I said I'm honored to be in that category with all of those women, I was sitting next to Tahaji and Quinta, and it was like, they're gonna get it. I mean, I'm not, it's like, what are we talking about? And when they said my name, I turned to my husband. I was like, what? So it was that my hair keeps being in my way, that I was not, it was grateful, doesn't begin to articulate it. And having the group that I got to work with, I mean, Ryan Johnson is a rock star, and Natasha Lyonne is just completely delicious. And I got to work with one of the people that I am inspired by her talent and who she is a Patha Murkison. And so it was that, and just the writing. It was like Wyatt Kane and Charlie Peppers. And it's like, again, I go back to the writing. So for me, it was all about, one sec, I'm gonna sneeze. No, I'm not. And it's still it's a gift and a delightful surprise, and that I have been acknowledged by my peers and the people that I am so appreciative of being in this business with them, that they saw it, and they saw me, and it means a great deal to me. Great deal. And I thank you for having me have this time so that we could talk about these things and these shows that I hold in great esteem and great gratitude that I got to do it and work with those people. So thank you.
Well, Judith, such a pleasure to speak with you. Congratulations on Julia and Shining Vale. Thanks again for talking to Gold Derby.
Thank you always. Appreciate it. Be well.